you. Yes, you. Thanks for tuning in to Killer Bites. In today's episode, I'm going to tell you all about what happened to Jaycee Lee Dugard while making some plant-based chicken nuggets. If you're curious, the recipe is in the description below. Jaycee Lee Dugard was only 11 years old when she was abducted from her home and locked in a soundproof shed in some sicko's backyard. 18 years, 2 pregnancies, and many disturbing experiences later, she was finally freed from captivity and reunited with her family. But Jaycee could have been found many years earlier if her abductor's parole officer did more thorough check-ins. Keep watching to hear more. I'm gonna get started by marinating tofu with soy sauce and a spice mixture. In the fall of 1990, the Dugard family moved from the town of Arcadia in Southern California to Myers in Northern California. Arcadia was in Greater Los Angeles, and the Dugards decided they wanted to move somewhere safer and quieter. Little did they know this new small town is the place their daughter would be abducted from. On the morning of June 10th, 1991, Terry Dugard rushed out of the house to make it to work on time. The previous night, Terry's 11-year-old daughter, Jaycee, asked for her to come in and say goodbye before she left for work. But Terry was already running late, so she decided to head out without kissing Jaycee bye. Later that morning, Jaycee woke up and got ready for school. She walked up the hill by her house to go to the bus stop, all dressed up in a cute pink outfit, ready to take on the day like a boss. But suddenly, this car pulled up and cut Jaycee off. The man in the driver's seat rolled down the window and pointed something at her. The next thing Jaycee knows, she feels tingly all over. She was just hit with a taser. After Jaycee fell to the ground, she was dragged into the car. Then the driver slammed on the gas pedal and sped away from the scene. Multiple people saw the abduction take place, including Jaycee's stepdad, Carl. Carl tried to chase the car down on his bike, but he couldn't catch up. Neither could any of the other witnesses who tried to help. So the police were notified of the crime, and officers were sent out to try and track down the mid-sized gray car people reported seeing. Meanwhile, Jaycee was just starting to open her eyes on the floorboard of the car. She was being held down by the female passenger, Nancy Garrido. Nancy's husband, Phillip, was the man driving the car. He was headed to his and Nancy's home in Antioch, which was a 3-hour drive from Myers. At one point in the trip, Jaycee heard Phillip say, "I can't believe we got away with it." And then he started laughing like a sick villain. Once they arrived at their destination, Phillip took all of Jaycee's clothes off except for a butterfly-shaped ring that was on her finger. He then put a blanket over her and took her to a shed in the backyard where he said he was going to put handcuffs on her. The whole time, Jaycee was trying to fight back, but she couldn't escape, and no one could hear her screams because the shed was soundproof. Phillip was also larger and stronger than her and threatened her with his taser, so there really wasn't anything Jaycee could do. At one point, Phillip told Jaycee that he abducted her so she could help him with his problem by being an outlet so he wouldn't have to go after others. He said she would be saving other people by being there. Now I'm going to add apple cider vinegar to oat milk. So here's the thing about Phillip. He was a registered offender who had a history of violating women. From what I can tell at this point, it seems like he took Jaycee into his home so he could regularly fulfill his sick desires of harming young girls, which he thought would stop him from preying on others. And that evening, Phillip closed both shed doors and locked her inside. Back in Myers, there was a massive search for Jaycee that extended throughout the South Lake Tahoe area. Police helicopters, canine units, officers on foot, and community volunteers all combed the area for the missing little girl. Local and national news stations ran stories on her abduction, flyers were sent out to businesses across the country, and pink ribbons were placed around town in honor of Jaycee's favorite color. But with all of their extensive efforts, authorities were unable to locate Jaycee or find any solid leads. Near the beginning of the investigation, Phillip's parole officer actually stopped by to search his house for a visit, but never looked in the shed to find Jaycee. She was so close to being rescued. That's so sad. Well, days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and months turned into years. As time continued to pass, the chance of Jaycee being found alive became slim to none. During the next several years, Jaycee was kept in handcuffs and moved around between a series of sheds and tents in the backyard. She had no human interaction other than Phillip regularly forcing himself upon her and Nancy acting as her jailer. Jaycee was given a TV but couldn't watch the news, so she had no idea people were out there searching for her. To help cope, Jaycee kept a journal where she wrote about her feelings and experiences. She talked about the little bit of moonlight that peeked through the towel that covered the window in the shed. This reminded her of her mom because they used to talk about the moon a lot. At one point, Jaycee signed her name at the bottom of a journal entry, but when Phillip saw it, he got mad and made her rip it off because he had renamed her Alyssa. Now I'm going to add in Italian seasoning and a spice mixture to panko breadcrumbs. But over time, Phillip and Nancy started to ease up on Jaycee. They took off her handcuffs for extended periods, even though they still kept her locked up. 3 years into her captivity, Jaycee was depressed, sad, and lonely. Nancy and Phillip fed her full of lies about how her family didn't love her anymore, and she wondered if she even had a place to go if she ever got out. In 1994, the Garridos sat 13-year-old Jaycee down and told her they thought she was pregnant. At 13. Jaycee later mentioned she knew she had gained some weight but didn't know what it was from. And it definitely wasn't from food because Phillip and Nancy didn't feed her well. So it all started to make sense, or as much sense as it could make to a 13-year-old who was horrifically abused. To prepare for her pregnancy, Jaycee had to watch a bunch of birthing videos because Phillip and Nancy refused to let her give birth in a hospital, let alone even see a doctor throughout her pregnancy. One day, Jaycee started to experience sharp pains, and right then and there in the lock shed, she went into labor. Jaycee later wrote in her journal that giving birth was the most painful experience ever. And at the time, she was only 14. But despite the pain of her labor that lasted for several hours, Jaycee said, "She came out and then I saw her. She was beautiful. I felt like I wasn't alone anymore. I had somebody else who was mine. I wasn't alone." 3 years later, Phillip got Jaycee pregnant again, and she gave birth to another little girl in the backyard. Wow, it's such a miracle that both pregnancies went okay without any medical assistance. Phillip eventually built a tall fence around the backyard where Jaycee was able to raise her 2 kids as best as she could. Using whatever information she could absorb from the TV shows she was allowed to watch, Jaycee homeschooled her kids and taught them gardening. All the while, Jaycee tried her hardest to shelter her girls from Phillip's outbursts. But at that point, the kids didn't know Jaycee was their mother. Jaycee was instructed to tell them Nancy was their mom and she was their older sister. And the worst part about it all is Jaycee is closer to the age of an older sister than a mother. So many years had passed since Jaycee was first ripped from her home, and she was still being abused by Phillip with no end in sight. In a journal entry from 2004, Jaycee wrote, "It feels like I'm sinking. This is supposed to be my life to do with what I like, but once again he has taken it away. How many times is he allowed to take it away from me? I'm afraid he doesn't see how the things he says makes me a prisoner." Jaycee didn't think she'd ever escape the Garridos' backyard, but every once in a while, she'd still look at the moonlight and think of her mom, Terry. The search for Jaycee obviously wasn't as active as it had been before, but there were still detectives on her case, and Terry hadn't given up hope that she'd be reunited with her daughter one day. There were a few close calls where Jaycee was almost discovered too. First, it was a parole officer who searched the Garridos' house way back when, and in the years following, Phillip's parole officer conducted regular check-ins and never caught on to what was going on in the backyard. The neighbor said Phillip was psychotic and seemed to be keeping kids out there in the tents. An officer stopped by to talk to Phillip but didn't search the property. Instead, the officer told Phillip that people living outside on the property was a code violation. Wow, I can't believe that's all they did. Then again, I'm sure Phillip was hesitant to let officers search his home, which meant they'd probably have to get a search warrant and all that. But in 2009, 18 years after Jaycee was abducted, her fate changed. That August, Phillip visited an FBI office in San Francisco to deliver a 4-page letter that talked about how he cured his urges involving intimacy with young girls and was offering up his experiences and information so they could help other predators cure their disturbing behaviors. He then made a trip to the University of California at Berkeley with his and Jaycee's 2 daughters to ask about holding a religious event on campus as a part of his God's Desire program. Lisa Campbell, the manager of the UCPD Special Events Unit, thought Phillip was acting very strange and noticed the girls were super pale, like they had never been exposed to the sun. She knew something fishy was going on but didn't want Phillip to know she was on to him, so she was very cordial and said to come back the next day to work out the details for his event. The second Phillip left, Lisa asked UCPD officer Allie to run a background check on him. That's when they discovered he was on parole for the abduction and physical abuse of a young girl. This wasn't Jaycee either. This was a previous victim from 1976. The next day, Phillip came back to the college campus with his 2 daughters. Allie and Lisa sat Phillip down with the 2 skittish-looking teen girls. Allie stated, "I couldn't get over the intense stare of the younger girl, like she was looking into my soul. She said it was like Little House on the Prairie meets Cult with kids." Allie and Lisa tried to engage in conversation with the girls, asking them their names and grades. The girls just nervously gave their names and said they were homeschooled. Lisa mentioned the girls' responses seemed rehearsed, and Officer Allie said her mother's intuition was kicking in. Something wasn't right, and she knew it. While alarms were going off in Lisa and Allie's heads, they were serving their best poker faces to Phillip, who was going in depth about his spiritual journey. He gave them a booklet he wrote titled Origin of Schizophrenia Revealed, and said he is now in a much better place from when he was in jail. According to him, he was doing God's work. During Phillip's performance, he grabbed his older daughter and told Allie and Lisa, "They're great girls. They don't even know any curse words." The officers watched while the girls remained stiff and fearful. Once Phillip left that day, Allie called his parole officer, who told her Phillip didn't have any kids. A day later, the parole officer scheduled a meeting with Phillip and the rest of his family. Phillip, Nancy, Jaycee, and the two little girls were all split up and interviewed. In the beginning, Jaycee stuck to the script Phillip gave her, that her name was Alyssa and she was originally from Minnesota but came to the Garrido's house to seek refuge from her abusive husband. When the detectives brought up Phillip's past offenses, she said he was a changed man and has been nothing but kind to her and her two daughters. In another room, Phillip was being interrogated by officials and he wasn't able to stay as strong. Phillip eventually broke down and admitted to abducting and harming Jaycee. So the female detective who spoke with Jaycee knew she was putting up a facade. The detective asked Jaycee what her name was. Jaycee responded, "I can't tell you." Phillip had brainwashed and manipulated Jaycee so much that she was scared to say anything, even though she was alone with the investigator. The woman kept asking Jaycee what her name was, and at one point she said, "I haven't said it in 18 years, but can write it down for you." The detective then grabbed a pen and paper for Jaycee, who wrote Jaycee Lee Dugard. After Jaycee came clean about her identity, investigators asked if she wanted to talk to her mom. Jaycee didn't know what to think or how to act. It had been so long since she'd seen her mother that she was nervous about the reunion. But the moment Jaycee saw her mom, a huge sense of relief and safety came over her. After a long hug and many tears, Terry said to Jaycee, "I knew I would see you again." Terry later told her daughter how much she regretted not going in and kissing her the morning she was abducted. At that moment, Jaycee was relieved. Her mom really did think about her and care for her, despite what Phillip and Nancy were saying. It was such an emotional day for Jaycee, Terry, and the whole family. And Jaycee's case was highly publicized, so as soon as word got out about her discovery, people who followed her story from across the nation were overcome with joy. This 18-year-long tragedy has finally come to a positive end. But things weren't all rainbows and butterflies after Jaycee was freed. She still had so much emotional trauma to sift through and cope with, not to mention her two daughters who never got a normal childhood. At this point, they were 11 and 14 years old. Once Jaycee found out Phillip was arrested and would be charged, she was kind of sad, and her two daughters reportedly cried. Some say Jaycee exhibited slight signs of Stockholm Syndrome as she had developed an emotional bond with Phillip. But Jaycee later believed it to be her way of coping with her situations. This man was one of the two humans she got to interact with for 18 years. He was the father of her children and was very manipulative. Thankfully, Phillip and Nancy were both found guilty and thrown in jail for a long time. Phillip was sentenced to 431 years to life. Nancy was sentenced to 36 years to life. Jaycee was able to officially get custody of her daughters. She began animal therapy and made her first public statement in 2010, where she said, "Hi, I'm Jaycee. I want to thank you for your support and I'm doing well. It's been a long haul, but I'm getting there." In 2011, Jaycee published an autobiography titled A Stolen Life. In her book, Jaycee went into detail about her abduction and 18 years in captivity. She also criticized parole officers for not being as thorough in the checkups with Phillip. If they were, she may have been found much earlier. Once the truth came out about what was going on in Phillip's backyard, the state parole system revamped its practices, and the state gave Jaycee a $20 million settlement for failing to find her sooner. And she deserved every penny. Jaycee seems to have a good attitude about the whole situation now. She stated, "What happened to me will always be a part of who I am, but I don't let that be the only thing that makes me who I am. I don't let those experiences or those people," meaning Phillip and Nancy, "define the relationships in my life now. When I do have something from the past pop into my head, I don't shy away from it either. It's important for me to acknowledge that thought or feeling and figure it out." For her to come out of such a horrific experience with an optimistic and reflective outlook is inspiring to say the least. Well, I'm gonna try and be more positive in my daily life, starting with these plant-based chicken nuggets. They look and smell amazing. Thanks for watching, everyone.